Hello watch enthusiasts. Now today I'd like to talk about some of the best value ISO certified divers. And the reason for this is that I've been asked by various people to make a video of professional dive watches, and the ISO criteria really do demonstrate that. Now before I start the video I would just like to set out the specifications of the ISO certification that watches go through, and there are various different grades, and if you're interested then please do tell me and I might be able to make a video, or hopefully we'll be able to make a video on these criteria in more detail. But for today, they're effectively tests of shock resistance, antimagnetism, humidity resistance, water resistance, and thermal temperature resistance underwater. So of course watches have to be put through particular tests with shocks made to the cases and the movements, and then also accuracy, and then also being taken to 25% above their rated depth rating to establish whether they're suitable for diving. So the first watch I'd like to talk about is the Seiko Turtle SR 77, and then there are various numbers after that depending on which dial configuration and bezel colour you go for. But this is the new version of the Turtle, and that's really how it's known. And the Turtle was a vintage Seiko reference of a 150-metre diver that became extremely popular and really gained cult status, so people were very excited to see this renovated version of that historical watch. Now as with the original, this watch is a cushion case shaped watch, with a brush top to that cushion case and then a polished side and underside. And the watch also comes on either a Seiko solid bracelet or a rubber strap, but either way it'll be a very functional dive watch. And it's water resistant to 200 metres, and as the name of the video would imply, it is ISO certified and within those very, very strict tests. Now, apart from being water resistant to 200 metres, this watch is also very, very well loomed, and it features Seiko's proprietary lume that's become extremely famous for its very bright glowing properties, and is shown by those large different hands which are very clearly legible in the dark, and also from those numerals and indices which are very typical of Seiko's watches, along with that lume pip on the bezel. And of course we have a unidirectional aluminium insert bezel, which is very, very functional and very legible, with graduations all the way around like the old SKXs were. Except where this watch differs from the SKX is in size and in terms of the movement used. The movement used is the Seiko in-house 4R36, which is an automatic hacking and hand-winding movement, which has features that we haven't seen previously on Seiko's lower-end dive watches. And really it is incredible that you get an in-house movement, of course from a large brand like Seiko, for the price of £250, which is where this watch comes in. Which is very impressive, and also for the small or the large wristed, having worn this watch, I can say it's very comfortable, no matter what. And this is impressive considering the case dimensions are quite large at 43mm by 14mm in thickness, but one has to remember it has a very, very short lug-to-lug for its size due to those very stubby lugs on either side of the bezel, which does add to the comfort of wearing one of these very impressive timepieces. Now the next watch to talk about is the Certina DS Action Diver. And this is a watch which caught my attention a few years ago, due to its remarkable quality really and features at this price point. And this is a watch which is produced by Bram, which is little known, especially by US watch lovers, or at least wasn't until a few years ago due to the lack of Certina's presence in the US. But these days they're very well known, and they produce really quite excellent dive watches around this price point, which are specified as ISO 6425 divers. And these are only 200-metre divers. Of course, very few people will need even 200 metres. But they do offer the shock resistance, thermal resistance, and so on that you would expect from an ISO diver. For any skin diver, then, this really is an excellent watch. And this is a 43mm timepiece which is fully brushed in either stainless steel for the blue sunburst version or the black, or for the grey sunburst version titanium, which comes in around £100 more than the steel version. But I'll talk about that in a bit, because pricing is quite interesting with this watch. Now the case of this watch is rather interesting, because though it's 43mm, which would be perceived as rather large, it has quite a short lug-to-lug distance of 49mm, which is very, very wearable for most people, and is very slim at 12mm thick, a good 2 or 3mm thick, thinner rather than most dive watches, which certainly is a benefit to this watch, and I think adds to the semi-dressy aspect of this professional dive watch, which has superb lume on its dial and hands as a result of needing to have this to pass the criteria of the test, but also has a bezel insert that's very attractive and adds a dressy aspect to this watch, because it has a sunburst effect along with that beautiful dial on both the blue and the grey versions, though the blue is really the most vibrant. The watch does also come on a stainless steel bracelet, which is entirely solid, and I think does add a deal of quality to the watch in both titanium and steel versions. And one nice thing about this is that whereas on most titanium watches there are very few polished surfaces because it's difficult to polish at this price point, the titanium version does have a polished titanium bezel and crown, which does add to the perceived quality of these watches. Now the pricing is rather confusing with this watch because in terms of the retail price, which is what I'll put up on the screen, they're available for £650 to £750 depending on the version. But really, you can get hold of them for a lot less than that if you look through sales and so on. So really it is worth having a look around for the best price for one of these watches, which I think offer a great deal for the money. Of course, the value of these watches is further augmented by the fact they are Swiss-made watches and have very respected ETA 2824s in them. And you do have the backing of a large brand, which does give you an element of security with one of these timepieces. Of course, in terms of being quality and attractive items, these watches do offer quite a lot as well, in that they have very beautifully applied, polished markers on the dial, and again, very nicely polished hands. And of course, that acrylic bezel is quite a rare thing to find on watches. Only a couple of manufacturers make them, and they offer a wonderful, clear look that's a bit like sapphire but has a warmer look to it, and also can be repolished if it does become heavily scratched as a result of regular use. But certainly it will offer a great deal of legibility, while also offering the more glamorous side to wearing a watch. The next watch I'd like to talk about is the Marathon dive watch. And these watches are made in various versions, and they swing a long way from the Certina's glamour towards a far more utilitarian role as far as professional dive watches go. And these are 300-metre military dive watches, with really all the features a professional diver could ever want in terms of having practicality that really exceeds anything else in terms of durability as well, in every situation. And these offer a fantastic package, I feel, considering that they're available in different sizes. There's a 36mm mid-size version, and then a full-size 41. So this does give a certain degree of variability to the sizing of the watch and the comfort on the wrist. And of course, all of these watches, since I'm talking about the automatic versions here, are ISO certified divers and in fact go on to more stringent tests as a result of Marathon's association with the military. And similarly are set up to be used, for instance, with thick gloves on and so on, which does add to the care taken with these watches to produce a watch which really is a professional dive watch. Now the cases of these watches are brushed because it's a very durable finish when compared to a polished finish, though of course a polishing job can be done more easily. Certainly I think brushing is more suitable for a tactical sort of watch like this. And really everything on the watch is designed for the sake of practicality. So the dial features these very clear tritium tube markers on it, which means that one doesn't need light for it to be illuminated. It'll glow for about 25 years, which is, give or take a year or two, the half-life of tritium, which is H3, hydrogen 3, which happens to be a beta particle emitter and so as a result glows. Which is a real practical aspect to this watch and does add to that military air of this watch as a watch that will work in any situation. Similarly, the bezel is designed to be extremely thick to give the maximum grip with gloves, and of course you have perforated lugs which allows you to change straps all the more easily. Of course, this is also a 300-metre diver, so certainly it is usable as a purposeful dive watch and has been used by the armed forces of the US. For a very long time now, Marathon have been used quite extensively by their armed forces in really every scenario, just because they're such durable watches and feature everything that you would need, the date, the time, at any time of night, and military time as well. And these watches come in with a price point which is really between £700 and £900, depending on where you look, and the size you get. But all the versions in the automatic line come with an ETA 2824 movement, which is regulated by Marathon to be really very, very accurate for the uses of the armed forces, as they do need a watch that will keep extremely good time, but that is easily serviced, which is an aspect of this watch which it is. And this watch comes on either a rubber strap, which is an Italian-made rubber strap, which is one of these very high-quality natural rubber straps which are extremely comfortable and really are better than silicone. Or alternatively, it comes on a solid bracelet, an oyster-style bracelet, and the choice really is a matter of opinion, though I think for diving I would rather go on a rubber strap just for the sake of avoiding scratches and also the fact that one doesn't need any sort of diver's extension for diving if you have a rubber strap. Now the next watch in this video is an absolute diving classic, and it's a watch which for a long time I found fairly cumbersome and unattractive, and I couldn't see really having one on my wrist. though I must say at the present time I really am considering buying one. And this is the 300 metre quartz Seiko Marine Master Professional, i.e. the tuner. And this is a watch which has gained fame in the 1970s, where the 600 metre version of this watch, which had a monoblock case and originally an automatic movement, though it's quickly moved to a quartz movement due to the sake of durability. And that's one of the aspects of this watch which is interesting, because Seiko didn't simply choose a quartz movement because it's cheaper than an automatic movement. In truth, the development of this movement has cost far more than it would have if they'd simply gone for one of their low-end mechanical movements. And the reason for this is they had to make a movement specifically for this watch. So the quartz movement in this watch isn't seen in any other Seiko timepiece, it's only seen in the tuner, which really is very impressive. Now what I feel makes this watch so excellent really for the price is that you're able to get that Seiko tuner air and aesthetic, which is to say that fairly simple rounded case with very, very short lugs jutting out on each side, and that typical and very iconic shroud, which is screwed on over the top, which protects the case, and can of course be replaced if it's bumped very vigorously against something, and does provide the watch with a great deal of protection, as far as a diving timepiece needs as a watch which will really inevitably be bumped and scratched. Now the sizing of this watch is remarkably deceiving really, because at 48mm across one would have thought that it would be an immense watch, but in truth it's still smaller than the larger automatic versions, which are 1000-metre water-resistant watches, because they're 52.5mm in diameter. But at 48mm it has barely any lug overhang, and in fact there isn't any if you count the extremity of the case. So as a result the watch is only 48mm from lug to lug, which means that actually it wears extremely well with a thickness of about 14.5mm, which does seem quite thick, but due to the case design sinks into the wrist very well. And of course one has to bear in mind there's no bezel jutting out above that, because the bezel is shrouded, as you can see, and can only be gripped in two places, but this does add a great deal of protection to that. Now, the bezel insert is a rather wonderful feature, and it's a lacquered insert, as seen on, for example, the Marine Master 300, the wonderful watch that a great deal of people have fallen in love with. And it's available either with this enamel insert or with a simple brushed metal insert, and that's very much a matter of choice. I personally would go with the lacquered version just because I think that lustre is quite gorgeous when compared to that subtly domed hard-lex crystal in the middle, which offers really wonderful reflections while not compromising the legibility of this timepiece. Now whilst talking about legibility, this watch is extremely legible with Seiko's newer version of their LumiBright setup with the lume, which is now brighter than ever before and slightly more green. But certainly with those indices on the dial, it's extraordinarily legible as far as watches go, and legible in the extreme, as well as having a covered lume pip on the bezel insert as well, on that fully graduated bezel, to add legibility to the watch in the dark. And of course the hands follow in the footsteps of watches such as the spring drive version of the tuner released a few years ago, because this watch now features the broad arrow hand on the hour hand, and then a straight minute hand, which I think allows the watch to be a little bit more legible than it used to be, though it does sacrifice those wonderful hands that one had on the 1970s versions, though I think that's a small price to pay for this altogether more modern version. And on the subject of the dial, the second hand, courtesy of that proprietary Seiko movement that's only used in this watch, the second hand will hit every marker perfectly, which is a very nice thing to see in a high-end quartz watch like this, especially when one considers that quartz watches are often seen as inferior to mechanicals, where here actually a great deal of care has been taken with this 7-jewel movement. And of course the watch does have that day-date function that's typical of Seiko watches. Now, bearing in mind this watch is a 300-metre diver, one has to also remember it is a saturation diver. People often say that a watch without a helium escape valve isn't a saturation diver, but these days with L-type gaskets one can avoid helium ingress entirely, which is exactly what Seiko have done here with this really tremendous dive watch. Now for the final watch in this list, I was going to talk about the Sinn U1, but actually upon reflection, one watch which fits the criteria better is the Sinn U200. Now the U200 is a very, very utilitarian watch, which is a 2000-metre diver, and it is 37mm, but it has quite a long lug-to-lug distance, which means it is very comfortable on the wrist, having had a look at these watches in the past. So I must say that they are very impressive in terms of wearability, and don't offer quite as cumbersome a wear as a Sinn U1 at 44mm. So it is more of a mid-sized watch, though that bezel does overhang the case substantially and does increase the size somewhat as well. But the features this watch offers are incredible really for the price point, and offer Sinn features that would only be seen on more high-end models at a reasonable price. and this watch comes in around the £1,750 mark, and a little bit more for the bracelet version. And the features really are impressive. So it's a 2,000 metre diver, but it's one of Zinn's Eisensatzmessers, then that's to say a mission timer watch. So it's a watch which has features from Zinn which is designed to make the watch impervious really to situations outside the case, and by so doing passes the ISO certifications with flying colours, as well as a great deal of Zinn's own aspects to this watch, which wouldn't normally be seen on an ISO diver. Now the 37mm case of the U200 is made out of submarine steel, which is the most corrosion-resistant steel used on wristwatches, and in fact isn't used by any other brand other than Zinn. And it offers a higher hardness as well than normal steel, which is also another aspect which is very impressive about this sort of steel. But then Zinn give a certain treatment to the bezel on this model, which is the part of the watch which will of course take the most knocks, because it overhangs almost the entirety of the rest of the watch, other than the far extremities of the lugs. And this is treated with their tegament technology, which is where they harden the steel, the surface of the steel, very, very substantially. So it's well over four or five times harder than normal stainless steel, making it extremely scratch resistant with that very attractive but simple bead blasted effect, which doesn't give off any bright reflections and makes the watch all the more legible. Now that submarine steel is also extremely antimagnetic, which results in the watch being antimagnetic to 1000 Gauss, making this watch far more antimagnetic than prescribed by the ISO certification, and really is far more magnetism than most people will ever come across. Where the standard for an antimagnetic watch is 4800 milliamps per metre, but in truth this watch is nearer 80,000, so as a result it's far higher than really anything you'd ever come across. But of course that case and that crystal, that thick sapphire flat anti-reflective crystal, offer a 2000 metre depth rating, which is really far beyond anything a diver can ever reach, with the record I believe being around the 700 or 800 metre mark. But nonetheless it's nice to see a watch offer this sort of innovation. And the dial is extremely uncluttered, with a flat matte black background, and the date placed at 6 o'clock to avoid it intruding into the reading and the legibility of the dial. It also has these large loomed hands, which are very, very clearly legible and can clearly be read at night. Of course, there are other Zinn technologies which go into this watch, and notably their AR dehumidifying technology. And this works by preventing the inside of the watch from gaining any sort of humidity ingress, and also by reducing the damage that normal oxygen would do to the parts, as the metal parts in the movement are oxidised by the air inside the case. So as a result, they fill the case with inert gas, one of the noble gases, and then also fit a copper sulfate capsule, which those who've had a basic education in chemistry will remember as a chemical which turns blue in contact with water and absorbs water in the process. So as a result, they fit a capsule of that so you can tell how much water has been absorbed via a little window in the capsule, and thus have it replaced every time it fills up. And this will be very, very rare, but of course it protects the inside of the movement from any long-term damage. One other benefit of these Zinn EZM watches is that they offer resistance to temperatures, and indeed can be kept at depth at these temperatures, from minus 45 degrees C to plus 80, which is really beyond anything I've seen from any other watch brand. And of course at 80 degrees the watch would burn your skin, but it does show the care taken by Zinn to produce a watch which truly is superior than others in terms of being water resistant and being something a professional diver can rely on day after day. The movement inside this watch is a simple Sleater SW200 or ETA 2824 based movement, which is regulated by Zinn, but offers a reliable movement for a watch of this nature. Anyway, I'll conclude the video here, but please do like, share and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and would like to see more content here in future. Also, do please leave your comments down below as to what you thought of my choices, and any watches you would have included instead. So thank you very much for watching. This is Arm on the Watch Guy, over and out.